Welcome to the next part of these podcasts. I'm John Moffat from the Heathrop Institute at the London Jesuit Centre. So far, we've been looking mostly at the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke. But we've not really stopped to notice that, quite apart from all those layered references to earlier texts, they are deeply human stories. This is a very important aspect of Gospel writing. It invites the readers in to recognise that the world of the Gospel is their world as well. What happens to the characters in the Gospel is the sort of thing they can recognise as happening to them and people they know. The longing for a child, the social stigma and peril of an unexpected pregnancy, the experience of being marginalised and pushed around by a foreign power, the real threat of intimidation and violence, the longing for a new era of freedom and hope for one's community, existential longing for forgiveness and healing, religious practices and institutions familiar from childhood. Matthew and Luke's Gospels begin in just this way, with the world familiar to their readers, and then show how the presence of Jesus transforms that world. John's Gospel is dramatically different. There is no window into intimate family history. Instead, we are taken back to the birth of the cosmos itself. The opening phrase deliberately echoes the first words of the book of Genesis, "In a beginning." It frames the gospel narrative that follows, showing that the gospel story is a decisive moment in the history of the whole of creation. As it does so, it introduces the theologically momentous concept of a new divine character, the Word. This Word is somehow distinct from God. The Word is with God. But at the same time, it is either divine or even identical with God. The Word was God. And it is intimately bound up with the creation and salvation history of the universe. It is the one through whom all things were made. We learn that this Word is light and life for humans, a light that primal darkness cannot overcome. John the Baptist appears as a messenger witnessing to this primal light. But then the focus returns to the Word through whom all things were made. The Word enters his own domain, but those who are his own do not accept him. The Word is identified with Christ, rejected in Jerusalem. And the introductory passage ends with the line that will become the signature claim of Christianity. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. This Word made flesh reveals the glory of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. In this podcast, we're going to focus on trying to understand where this language of the divine creative word comes from, a foundational building block of the Christian theology of the Trinity. We shall see that this theological idea is a creative fusion, rooted partly in the Jewish scriptures and partly in ideas found in Greek philosophy. It is an idea that helped early Christians make sense of their experience of Jesus, the crucified and risen one, as someone who revealed to them the true face of God, and also one that helped them make their experience intelligible to people in the world around them. So let's look at Greek philosophy, which had shaped the intellectual environment around Greek-speaking Jews from long before the time of Jesus. What would a Greek philosopher mean when they used the word logos, which we translate as word? Well, it can mean a bewildering number of things, from a speech to a geometrical ratio, to an explanation or account of how things are, to the human mental capacity to understand the world. It is this last meaning, close to understanding or intelligence, that is most helpful for us here. When Greek-speaking philosopher-scientists were trying to explain why things happened in the world and how the world came about, all were agreed that the universe was orderly. That is exactly what the word cosmos means. But they had to answer a question which is still very live in modern philosophy. What was it made the universe orderly? Was it accident or design? Some people, like Democritus and Epicurus, believed that order emerged by accident out of the mechanical interactions of the basic building blocks of the universe. Others, like Plato and Aristotle and the philosophers known as Stoics, believed that the order and structure and goodness in the universe could only be explained if there was an intelligence behind it. The raw material of the universe must be shaped according to the plan of a divine mind. And here is where the Greek word logos enters theology. Because logos can mean both the plan and the reasoning process that develops or enacts the plan. Plato talks about that plan in his influential work Timaeus, about 350 years before the time of Jesus. There he presents it as timeless, static and changeless. The divine craftsman who shapes the raw materials of the universe uses the timeless plan to guide the creation of the world we see, filled with very unstatic things which change and transform. But Plato was not the only one interested in the logos. The Stoic school of philosophers who came to the fore a generation after Plato had a slightly different picture of the divine mind. Their logos was a dynamic physical part of the universe belonging to the elements of wind and fire. This divine mind was an active word or spirit, a spiritual force that ran through the whole universe and was constantly shaping the passive elements of earth and water into new forms. But what does any of this have to do with Jewish thought? Well, round about the time that Paul was writing his letters, a Jewish philosopher in Alexandria called Philo was writing a commentary on the Hebrew scriptures beginning with Genesis. He believed that Moses was the author of Genesis and was proud of the fact that the great Jewish lawgiver provides a philosophical rather than a mythological account of creation. As he gives his explanation of the first chapter of Genesis, he uses language which any philosophically trained reader will instantly recognize as borrowed from Plato. There is a divine craftsman who creates the physical universe out of chaos according to a plan. The only difference is that whereas Plato gave the plan a separate existence from the craftsman, Philo insists that the plan exists in the mind of God. And the word he uses for mind of God is, again, logos. We can now begin to understand some of what lies behind the word of John's Gospel. His logos is the divine mind which contains the ultimate plan of creation. It is, however, a mind and a plan, both within God and yet with an identity all of its own. We know what the words mean in that last sentence, but it is a bit more difficult to make sense of them. Here, it helps to look at the other, more dynamic version of logos used by the Stoics. For them, the logos, or divine word, is like a creative, active, intelligent force in the world. It is an instrument of God, which makes it divine, but it has its own independent identity. It runs through everything and shapes it according to God's will. It is also something which humans share in, because humans all have a part of that divine spark of logos, creative intelligence within them. When we put that description beside a key passage from 2nd Isaiah, that's the one who wrote during the early Persian period, suddenly it becomes easier to see why some Jewish thinkers found the crossover between Greek ideas and Hebrew theology so inviting. Listen to this short passage from chapter 55 of Isaiah. As the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return without watering the earth, making it yield, and giving growth to provide seed for the sower and bread for the eating, so the word that goes from my mouth does not return to me empty, without carrying out my will and succeeding in what it was sent to do. John's use of the word logos fits just as well into this very Jewish scriptural background as it does into the Greek philosophical background. He is making use of an emerging hybrid form of Jewish theology, in which a divine being, through whom all things were made, can be sent into the world to continue shaping its destiny according to the will of God. When we look elsewhere in the Hebrew writings, we can find other examples of this dynamic word of God, which lend themselves to discovering a similar philosophical reader meaning in the sacred text. Most strikingly, creation begins when God speaks, "Let there be light," and there was light. Then, new phases of salvation history will often begin when the word of God comes upon a prophet. That word, declared orally, reveals God's saving will in the moment and initiates new trains of events. In the book of Exodus, the word of God par excellence is the Ten Commandments, the summary of the law. As at the beginning of Genesis, God speaks, and this time directly to the whole people. Here, the word of God encapsulates the dynamics of a whole way of life. It is the plan or pattern for living given to God's people so that they can live a blessed life and enjoy God's favour. That idea of a plan or blueprint for human living has an obvious analogy with the idea of a blueprint or plan for the whole universe, which we met with in Philo of Alexandria, and which he called a logos, a word. Let's follow that trail for a moment, the connection between the creative commanding word of God and the gift of the law. We find that in the so-called writings or wisdom literature, the law intersects with another Hebrew term, which also sheds light on John's concept of logos as a person. This is the Hebrew word for wisdom, chokhmah, or sophia in Greek. It features prominently in the Hebrew books of Proverbs and Kohelet, as well as in the Jewish Greek books Sirach and Wisdom, and many of the Psalms. All this so-called wisdom literature includes much sage advice for living expressed in pithy sayings. But more importantly for our purposes, every so often it presents wisdom as a divine person, a female figure who mediates a life-giving way of life. Eventually, particularly in the Book of Wisdom, this figure of wisdom comes to embody the Jewish law itself. And there is one particular passage from the book of Proverbs which is hinted at throughout the New Testament and became central to developing the Christian theology of the word. The passage comes from Proverbs chapter 8. Here, wisdom is speaking at the beginning of the world. Notice, though, she is a person, not just an abstract idea. The Lord created me when his purpose first unfolded, before the oldest of his works. From everlasting I was firmly set, from the beginning, before earth came into being. I was by his side, a master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence, at play everywhere in the world, delighting to be with the sons of men. Notice in particular that last idea that God's wisdom has an affinity for humankind. There is an important bridge here to that idea of the word becoming flesh. It implies something like friendship between the divine realm and humanity. It offers a human, narrative explanation for why the divine wisdom might want to become incarnate. Now, let's look a little more at that connection between divine wisdom and the law. The great Psalm 119 is a meditation on the beauty of God's law as something life-giving for those who follow it. We find there the language of light which surfaces in John's Gospel, and which also has parallels in the philosophical imagery of the pagan Plato and the Jewish Philo. Your decrees are so wonderful, my soul cannot but respect them. As your word unfolds, it gives light, and the simple understand. Word, wisdom, light, life. At one level, these words that occur at the beginning of John's Gospel seem quite abstract, philosophical rather than personal, conceptual rather than existential. But when we dig deeper and look at the Jewish roots of those concepts, we find that they evoke the same powerful and intense sense of a dynamic relationship with God as can be found in the Psalms and the prophets. This word, this person, contains within themselves the ultimate meaning of everything, the whole universe, and the life of each individual human being within it. This complex of ideas is presented in a powerful visionary form in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke. All three Gospels share the same sequence. Jesus is named as Messiah by Peter, then declares that he must suffer, die, and rise. Immediately after that, he takes 3 chosen disciples up a mountain where he is transfigured. His clothes and appearance become brilliantly radiant. He is seen speaking to Moses and Elijah, and they speak of his passage. A sacred cloud evokes the theophanies of Exodus. The voice of God declares, "This is my son, listen to him." The symbolism cannot be lost on the well-read reader. Jesus properly belongs to the realm of the divine. The physical texts of the law and the prophets are about him and his mission. He is the ultimate meaning behind their words and their ultimate source. There remains a question, though. How can ideas like these work in a faith which commands the worship of one Lord alone? How can it be possible to have 2 persons in the divine realm? The answer seems to lie partly in creative ambiguity and partly in further creative reading of Old Testament text. We'll explore some of that in the next episode.